On day 9, we'll head over to Mesa Verde National Park to look at the Pueblo ruins and then head to Moab, Utah for the night. We soon arrive at Mesa Verde National Park. It'll be an hour's drive and 15 miles long to get to the visitor center from this point on a very twisty, curvy road. Along the way, we'll see various white-tailed deer up in this area. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish, and we have to climb up on top of that table, or mesa, which is about 7,000 feet high. So we'll be driving upward. This road in 1914 was built as a narrow dirt road, and it took about 3 hours to drive to the headquarters. Then it was paved, but there were many wrecks. So in 1957, they built the Moorfield-Pratton Tunnel, which we'll be going through, and bypass some of the more dangerous and precarious areas. Let's just watch it and see how it twists and turns. Soon we arrive on the mesa top, and you'll notice it's again one of those pygmy forests like we saw around the Grand Canyon. Unfortunately, there have been some fires in the area, and you can see much of the forest has been burned. Soon we arrive at the visitor center. This became a park in 1906. We have driven from the entryway all the way along this twisty, curvy road to the Chapin Mesa Museum. We'll go down and look at Spruce Tree, and then we'll come back up and look at the museum. Deborah will wait at the museum while I take the trail down into the canyon and then back up on the other side to Spruce Tree House. This is the only one I'm going to be able to access, it seems, because of the nature of some of the others only being reached by ladders and other such things. The trail is about a half a mile long and gains and loses 100 feet in elevation. And here we get our first look across the canyon at Spruce Tree House. It probably looks similar to this artist's conception. You can see they farmed on the mesa and lived underneath it. This area was excavated in 1908, but was built around 1211 to 1278 and is the third largest cliff dwelling in the park. It has 130 rooms and 8 kivas, and we'll be looking at these in much detail while we're here. About 80 people lived here, and you can see that the ruins still are several stories high, and maybe this is what it looked like when they were living here. The T-shapes are actually doors, not windows. Here you can see an open courtyard, and down there we're standing on a kiva, actually. We'll go down and look at it in just a minute. And up here you can see the beams that would come out for a balcony. So 3 stories tall. The first story would have had another story in front of it so you could walk on the roof and get to the T-shaped doors, and then a balcony to hold you up to get into the next level. Here you can see some of the T-shaped doors as we look across the Pueblo. Now it's time to go visit a kiva. You'll notice here that they're under paved courtyards in this area and all underground. So let's remove this courtyard and see what it looked like underneath. There would have been 6 stone posts holding up the roof. You can see 4 here, and many air vents to let in fresh air and smoke out. Inside you would have an air deflector to make the smoke go up and to keep the drafts down, a fire pit for building a fire, and a sapopu, which is used for bringing the spirit into the area, and benches all around to sit on. The only access was usually down ladders. And here you can see how the pilasters hold up the roof beams that support the roof that then eventually supports the courtyard above. And then here you can see a deflecting stone that is used to blow the air upwards so that the smoke goes up and there's no drafts. The community lived in the courtyards, and these are places for grinding their wheat, and here's some more community places for grinding wheat together. And now it's time to head back out and go to the Archaeology Museum and see how they lived. People have been living in this area for thousands of years. As you can see, the mesa was a flat land that's been cut into to make canyons by water flowing, and so the canyon dwellings are right along the edges. Hunter-gatherers are in this area from 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, and then the basket maker period came about 400 AD. These people mainly didn't have permanent homes, but traveled from place to place with little shelter, gathering what they could, and farming a little bit. In about 550 AD, the modified basket makers start to settle down in what are called pit houses. We'll look at some of these later, as they dug a pit into the ground and covered it. Being underground helps you to keep warmer. These people built what were called shallow pit houses about 600 AD, but they burned and have been excavated somewhat. Then those shallower pits were dug deeper to keep the house warmer, and eventually many people think this is where the kivas came from. Then between 750 and 1100 AD, they started to build pueblos, permanent housing up on top of the mesas so that they could live in communities. They also started growing many crops, including corn and other such things for food. Then in about 1100 to 1300 AD, they started building pueblos into alcoves around the canyons, most of them being built around 1200 AD. And they were several stories tall, as you can see here. This latter group probably dressed somewhat like this, and they had stone implements and tools like these axes. They also made pottery with these kind of distinctive designs with lines on them. And they started to make petroglyphs where they would pound on the stones to make various images. These are some pictures from some of their life, grinding corn, cooking, and various other things. The men would be hunters and doing the various other tasks, making jewelry, using the yucca for food, and also to make ropes out of. They made moccasins and lived in this area for a long time. But then in 1300 AD, we're not really sure why, they just disappeared and moved southeast to form the pueblos there that we currently have Native Americans in. It's now time to move from this area down to this area to look around, and specifically Cliff Palace first. And it has the pygmy forest up on top. This is the largest cliff dwelling in North America. It has 150 rooms and 23 kivas on 3 different levels, and about 100 to 120 people lived here, and there's 75 open areas. This is the ruins as they looked like when they were found, and this is what it looks like today. It's a hard access, climbing many ladders, but there is a ranger guided tour of this if you want to come and look. Many think it might have been an administrative area because of so many kivas and so few dwellings. In 1888, cowboys found it and started leading tours here, and this area was excavated in 1909. As you can see from the inside of this house, they had colors and painting, and these are the original timbers to hold up the roofs. The average lifespan was 32 to 34 years, and this will help you understand what it might have looked like. Men were 5 feet 4 inches tall, and women were about 5 feet tall. They said most of the places didn't have hearths, so they think it might have even been a ceremonial town that was here. There were many cliff dwellings in the area. They weren't just one per canyon. In fact, there were over 30 in this area you're looking at right now. Now it's time to move from Cliff Palace to look at House of Many Windows across the canyon. As you can see here, it's almost unnoticeable until we zoom in on it. Now that you can see the house, I bet you didn't notice the other part of the house. Here's the main part of the house, and up above is the alcove, and between them was some little toe holds cut into the rock like this that they climb between, and then they climb on up by other toe holds on top of the mesa. Now it's time to go look at Hemingway House. There's not much known about it, but again, it's just one of those little alcoves here in the valley, and you can see a few homes built there, maybe 20 people living there. And up on top you can see how flat the mesa is for farming and the mountains in the distance. Now we drive around the road and go to Balcony House. Balcony House is so named because it has a balcony that would have had access to the top floor. It looked like this when it was found. This is the most adventuresome of the tours as you climb a 32-foot tall ladder, crawl through a tunnel to get to it, and so I'm not going. You can see the ladder here on the right. It is a medium-sized pueblo with 40 rooms, and you can see the pygmy forest is here also. Now time to head back to the ranger headquarters and drive along the Mesa Top Loop on this side of the mesa. Along the way we see more of the burnt forest that has been decimated by wildfires set by people. The Mesa Top Loop is 6 miles long, has 12 sites, and covers over 600 years of occupation. Our first stop will be Pitt House. There we'll be able to look at a pit house from 600 AD, some of the first permanent dwellings. In the back you see the anteroom and the fireplace in the center, and also the place to deflect the air, as you see in the center between the fireplace and the anteroom. These shallow pit dwellings were some of the first homes here and were covered, as you can see, by a structure of mud and were accessed by a ladder. And you can see the structure here from 600 AD. They were dark and dim, and many think fire traps since most have been found burned. Shallow Pit House seems to have gone in two directions. First, the pueblos that people lived in permanently, but also seems to be the start of the kivas, the spiritual sites that we've been looking at. And here you can see in this canyon that there are hundreds of sites, most of which you don't even see. And even though there are hundreds of pueblos and alcoves, like this one I don't even know the name of, there's still several hundred more sites up on top of the mesa. We now will be moving over to the Square Tower House. This is a jump of over 600 years from the Pit House to 1200 AD when it was built, and it's obvious why it's called the Square Tower House. You have a 4-story tall tower in the middle. There's a spring at the bottom of the alcove, and that's where they got their water from. And now it's time to move from Square Tower over to some more pit houses to see how they lived around 600 AD. As you can see from this picture here, you have the fire pit in the middle, the deflector, and an anteroom in the back. As we're standing now looking from the anteroom into the area, they would store their food underground and cover it with sticks and rock. And here's how they would have covered the shallow pits. Because of all the canyons, this area was hard to travel through. They did have routes down in the valley floors, but there was also toehold routes up the cliffs themselves. Now let's move over to some more Pueblo ruins. It's now time to move about 100 years into the future to another pit home. In fact, it'll be two pit homes, one built on top of the other. And you see here the stone they used for grinding the corn, like this. The original pit house here had a pit house and an anteroom, but the pit house burned, so they turned the anteroom into another pit house. You can see the two here, the last one being the green one. And here you see the vent hole that would have allowed air to come in, and the deflector stone that would have been used to drive the air upward and clear the house of smoke. You can see three of those here. Now we're going to move about another 150 years into the future, and people are now living above ground in a crescent-shaped village with stones for the base and wattle and daub for the walls. You can see the area here and a pit room beside it. You can see how the wattle and daub would have been built. They would have put in uprights and then wove sticks between them and daubed them with mud. Now it's time to move over to this pit room, which was used for ceremonies, cooking, sleeping, and maybe they stayed in these during the winter to keep a little bit warmer. You can see here how the pit room eventually could become a kiva. Now we move a few hundred years more into the future and we come to a stone village. Entire walls being built of stone, and they had a very well-built kiva, as you can see here now, with round walls and plaster. You can see here another vent hole that would be used for bringing in the air. It might have looked like this when in use. So in this one area we've moved from 600 AD in the pit houses to 850 AD in the crescent-shaped wattle and daub walls to here the stone village of about 150 years after that, about 1000 AD. Now time to move to some other stone village ruins. This area was occupied just before they moved into the alcoves, and is actually three villages, one on top of the other. During the excavations, they found three villages, one on top of the other, as you can see from this diagram. The first one was made of wattle and daub. Then we moved to the second one, which was made out of stone. And then we moved to the third one, which had double row stone walls and towers. First one looked something like this. The second one looked like this. And the third probably looked like this. Inside the building, we can get a good look at several of the kivas that were built during this time period. This is the last one built, and you can see it's very well constructed. Now we move from here to the Sun Point Pueblo. It was one of the last ones constructed because in the 1200s they started moving into the alcoves. It had a tower in the center and a kiva with buildings around it. And it looked probably a lot like this. We're not sure why towers and kivas were hooked together, but they seem to have taken apart this village, maybe moving its parts into one of the alcoves. The tower is connected by a tunnel to the kiva, as you can see here. We're not really sure why. Maybe it was for lookout, maybe for ceremonial purpose. And now it's time to move out on Sunview Point where we can see the area around us. We're going to be looking at about 1200 to 1300 AD, and there you can see Mummy House. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but right above the area on the cliff is another area. You see so many of these so close together, and up on top is the Sun Temple, which we'll be going to later. In fact, let's look over at it now. We'll be visiting this as soon as we get through on this part. Then we'll look at the Sunset House. This is beautiful when the sun sets as it glows into the house. Again, note the cliff right above the alcove is used for homes also, and the way you get there is climbing on toe holds. Now we turn to the left and see Oak Tree House, also down in the valley in its alcove. It had 7 kivas in it, and is mostly in ruins today, with just a few walls still standing and the typical T doors, as you can see there. Then turning to the right, we can get a really great view of Cliff Palace in its alcove across the canyon from us. As we walk back, a sagebrush lizard runs across the trail. Now it's time to drive around the road and go to the Sun Temple. It was built while they were still living in the alcoves below, and we're not sure what it was. This D shape has 2 large kivas and another smaller one. It also had a tower there. The walls were built of double rows of masonry 4 feet thick and filled with rubble, as you can see here. Since they didn't find any roof beams or household goods, many think it was abandoned before it was finished. It had about 30 rooms, but no doors or windows. And here you can see the 2 kivas. They were rather large for their time period. Some think this was a ceremonial place built by the Anasazis, who were living in the alcoves at the time, and you can see it's been dressed very well. Had about 30 rooms, but no doors and no windows on the outside. And here's the tower. It would have been very massive. And within this area, about 1/3 of the population that lived in this area would have lived there. Now let's travel north to Fairview sites and look at them. Fairview was occupied by over 600 years and was very densely populated with over 50 villages in a half square mile. 6 have been excavated, and we're going to look at them. The first one we're going to look at is Fairview House itself. This pueblo had 4 kivas, the central one being huge, and a tower outside. It was built about the time they were moving into alcoves. It was probably 2-story and had 40 rooms on the first floor. Next, we'll move over to the Pipe Shrine House, which is very close and probably related in some way. This was a medium-sized house with 20 rooms on the ground floor and a large kiva in the center of it. And if you'll notice here, as you look at the kiva, above it is a round room that many think was a tower. This became known as the Pipe Shrine House because underneath the floor in the kiva they found 12 pipes that were used for ceremonial purposes. You can see here a row of doors. Now we'll follow the trail around this area over to Fairview Tower. It had a tower which was connected to its kiva. It would have probably looked something like this. You can see the first floor of the tower is very well preserved, but it may have been 5 or 6 stories tall. And here are the 2 kivas that attached to it. Now it's time to head down the path to the next place, which we'll be looking at is Fairview Reservoir, or called Mummy Lake, from about 900 to 1300 AD. They collected water here from all the surrounding area to use it for irrigation. This is the intake area here, top center, and the water flowed in from the south. And then there were even steps to get down into it if you needed to. Now we'll walk up the path from the reservoir to the megalith house. This is one of the earlier of the houses in 1200 and had large stones placed around the bottom of it to help give it stability and also to be a foundation. Thus it's called the megalith house. The pueblo might have looked like this as it was built, and you can see here the megalith stones. Now as we head on down the path, we come to Coyote Village. The village was built about 800 to 1000 AD, just before they moved into the alcoves, And you can see the 5 kivas here and the tower. This is the only pueblo I was able to walk in on the mesa top, and so I'm going to take a good look around. You can see how the walls were built here and how there was row upon row of kiva, and here's the tower. This village was very well made, and of course the kivas would have been covered by plazas and stone pavement. You see these boards here are original, and maybe they were there for drying racks of some kind. And here you see the tunnel that goes up into the tower that would have been many stories tall. And here's a door. Here you can see a fire pit and places for grinding corn. They did this together as a social event, and the society was matrilineal, which means property passed from mother to daughter, and a husband would move in with his wife's family. It's now time to leave the park and head north. This is Knife Point, and as you can see, a road went around this originally, but it was so dangerous they moved it and built a tunnel. And this is Montezuma Valley. At the time of 1200 AD, there were about 35,000 Anastasies living here, but in the 1300s, they all moved southwest. And now it's time to head to Moab, Utah, where we'll spend 3 nights and look around Arches National Park and also Canyonlands National Park. In the distance you can see Mount Was. We'll be driving around the base of it for the next few hours. And then it's time to settle into Moab for a few days while we stay at the Sleep Inn and take a look at the mountains across from the inn as we get ready to end day 9.